We are approaching perhaps the most profound economic upheaval of the past 50 years, a shift that will wipe out countless savings rooted in outdated financial principles. The forces reshaping the world economy, cost push inflation, the unraveling of globalization, and an escalating debt trap are already rewriting the rules of wealth and stability. Without proactive preparation, many will face serious financial peril. To grasp the magnitude of these changes, it is essential to understand the two fundamentally contrasting types of inflation shaping the global landscape. Between them lies a chasm that can determine the prosperity or ruin of entire nations. Demand pull inflation emerges from healthy economic growth, rising wages, increased consumer spending, and a steady, moderate increase in prices. In such an environment, banks are eager to lend, and people confidently invest in real estate, businesses, and assets. This was the dominant inflationary pattern since the 1980s. A critical trait of demand pull inflation is its controllability via monetary policy. Central banks can raise interest rates to temper an overheated economy or lower them to stimulate growth during downturns. The system functions like a finely tuned machine, predictable and efficient. Imagine an economy where interest rates are expected to decline over time, fostering confidence that investments will yield profits. This certainty shaped a generation of investors who became accustomed to the continuous erosion of money's value in ever-rising markets. Every downturn was seen as a temporary dip before the next surge, fueling a belief that buying on dips was a safe strategy. This approach succeeded because economic slowdowns were routinely followed by rate cuts, fueling further growth. Even crises like the financial crash of 2008 or the pandemic resulted in expansive quantitative easing, near zero interest rates, and swift recoveries. This cycle fostered a generation unafraid of debt. Mortgages, stock investments, cryptocurrencies, startup funding, believing that debt grows lighter over time in a world of declining money value. Yet, a new economic phenomenon is now emerging: cost push inflation. Unlike demand-driven inflation, this results from rising costs in producing goods and services. The troubling part is that this form of inflation cannot be tamed using conventional tools. Why? Because increasing interest rates in this context does not curb inflation. Instead, it suppresses economic growth. Central banks face an impossible dilemma. Raising rates to fight inflation diminishes economic activity, risking recession, while lowering them fails to address the core issue of soaring costs. This fundamental shift threatens to undermine the stability that many have relied upon for decades, forcing a reevaluation of investment and fiscal strategies in the face of an increasingly complex financial future. A paradoxic situation has emerged where economies are experiencing a slowdown or even recession, while inflation remains stubbornly high. Economists refer to this as stagflation, a scenario that poses a severe challenge to policymakers. The core issue lies in the ineffectiveness of traditional measures designed to combat inflation, akin to trying to treat a burn with cold therapy or a cold with heat. Impossible and potentially counterproductive. Central banks now find themselves caught in this trap, faced with an impossible choice. The root of this dilemma traces back to the unraveling of global supply chains and the decline of the globalization model that fueled recent decades' prosperity. For years, globalization allowed production to be centralized in regions with the lowest costs, suppressing global prices and enabling access to affordable goods. This system thrived on the principle of economic efficiency, manufacturing where it was cheapest, then distributing products worldwide to maintain price stability. Consumers in developed nations enjoyed inexpensive goods, while developing countries benefited from job creation and technology transfer. However, since around 2016, this paradigm has begun to falter, and recent events, including the pandemic, have accelerated the shift toward deglobalization, making it increasingly irreversible. The pandemic revealed the fragility of supply chains, exposing the risks of depending on a single geographic region for essential goods. Consider how many items in your everyday life are produced thousands of kilometers away. Imagine how prices would surge if local manufacturing had to replace distant supply origins. This fundamental change has compelled many developed nations to rethink their economic strategies. Efficiency, based purely on cost savings, has been replaced by a focus on reliability and security of supply. Governments and companies now prioritize safety over cost, prompting a profound shift in economic thinking. The global division of labor is actively breaking down, with new trade barriers, geopolitical tensions, and protectionist policies encouraging production to move back home, despite significantly higher costs. For instance, after tariffs on Asian electronics imports, a major appliance manufacturer announced plans to build a plant in the United States. While heralded as a victory for domestic employment and increased tax income, the reality is that production costs there will be about 40% higher than in Southeast Asia, highlighting the economic trade-offs of this shift. Additional costs incurred in production are inevitable and will ultimately be passed on to consumers. Reshoring, bringing manufacturing back to developed nations, directly drives up costs. For example, the average hourly wage for a worker in the manufacturing sector in the United States hovers around $25 compared to $10 in Eastern Europe and merely $5 in Southeast Asia. Naturally, these disparities significantly influence the final price of goods. A similar situation exists in the microelectronics industry, a cornerstone of modern technology. Semiconductor manufacturing, once concentrated in specific regions benefiting from economies of scale, has become a matter of national security concerns. Many countries now aim to localize chip production, with the United States investing roughly $280 billion to bolster its domestic semiconductor industry. While such investments reduce reliance on foreign supplies, they inevitably lead to increased manufacturing costs. The combined effect of these shifts is clear. Prices are set to rise in a sustained long-term trend, resistant to traditional monetary policy tools. An even more destabilizing factor is the staggering level of global debt, which has soared to an astonishing $307 trillion, more than triple the world's combined gross domestic product of about $100 trillion. This situation reflects a world where our financial obligations far outstrip our capacity to fulfill them. Achieving such lofty debt levels was made possible only by decades of exceptionally low interest rates. Effectively, the global economy has fallen into a trap of cheap money with no easy exit. The financial system has become hostage to its own strategies. Whenever signs of recession appeared, central banks would lower interest rates and ramp up money creation. However, this approach has a fundamental flaw. Each economic downturn requires even larger injections of liquidity to produce the same stimulus. After the crisis of 2008, it took trillions of dollars and zero interest rates for nearly 10 years to revive growth. When the pandemic struck, the money printing had to be expanded multiple times. Now, with rising interest rates seen as necessary to curb inflation, servicing this enormous debt is becoming prohibitively expensive. Consider a simple economic illustration. The United States gross domestic product stands around $26 trillion. Servicing the current national debt consumes approximately 10% of this total. An increase of only a few percentage points in interest rates would impose a crushing financial burden, akin to a family devoting half of its income to mortgage repayments and credit card bills. Any unforeseen event could trigger a financial crisis. This scenario exemplifies a classic debt trap. On one side, raising interest rates is essential to combat inflation, but on the other, higher rates sharply increase debt servicing costs, risking a recession. Despite repeated warnings from economists about the perils of unchecked debt accumulation, their voices have been drowned out by a chorus of optimists insisting that this time everything will be different. The widely accepted belief that deficits are inconsequential has become an unquestioned dogma in economic policy. For decades, Keynesian economists have advocated for increased government spending during economic downturns and budget surpluses during periods of growth. However, the second part of this logic, running surpluses, was often overlooked. Instead, governments consistently increased expenditures regardless of the economic cycle, resulting in an unparalleled accumulation of debt. Currently, the public debt in developed nations averages over 100% of their gross domestic product, but this is only one aspect of a far more troubling picture. Corporate debt has reached historic highs while household borrowing continues to grow. It's crucial to recognize that official debt figures are only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lie significant liabilities for Social Security, pensions, and health care, which are largely absent from official statistics. When these hidden obligations are factored in, the true scope of financial risk appears even more alarming. The world economy has effectively reached a dead end, with no simple solutions in sight. A prolonged period of low interest rates, reckless fiscal policies, and the illusion of perpetual growth has pushed us toward the brink of financial catastrophe, forcing us to confront the consequences. Such realities have direct implications for ordinary individuals. How will forthcoming economic shifts influence personal finances? The first point to grasp is the magnitude of potential change. At a typical inflation rate of 3%, a sum of money loses roughly half its value over 15 years. While unpleasant, this allows for some level of predictable planning, saving for retirement, investing in long-term projects. However, when inflation exceeds 10%, the same period erodes the value of savings by about 85%. For example, just under 100,000 rubles saved for a child's education or a pension would be worth only 20,000 after 15 years. This isn't simply a matter of adjusting financial plans. It effectively destroys their foundation. Many underestimate how damaging even moderate inflation can be. At 7%, money halves in value within a decade, at 10% in less than 7 years, and at 15%, it collapses in under 5 years. This process is exponential and accelerates annually. Pensioners and those on fixed incomes are especially vulnerable since their earnings do not automatically adjust to inflation. Without indexing pensions or salaries, they find their purchasing power eroding silently year after year. Additionally, the availability of credit has historically been a tool for major purchases, homes, cars, or education, especially when interest rates are low. Many plan to refinance their loans at reduced rates in the future. Yet, in the current economic climate, with interest rates soaring, such strategies are increasingly out of reach. High borrowing costs make loans unaffordable for most, and refinancing no longer offers the economic relief it once did. Predicting exact trends in interest rates over the coming years remains an impossibility, but it is clear that the era of ultra-low borrowing costs has ended. We are now returning to more normal levels, reminiscent of times when an 8% mortgage was considered reasonable rather than predatory as it is often perceived today. The real estate market, traditionally regarded as a secure savings vehicle, may soon face considerable hurdles. Elevated interest rates tend to restrict access to mortgage lending, which in turn dampens demand and causes prices to decline. Historical patterns demonstrate that when rates rise sharply, property values can slump by as much as 25%. While such corrections are natural in economic terms, for those who bought homes at market peaks with minimal down payments, this decline can result in negative equity, the situation where the property's value drops below the remaining loan balance. The stock market, another pivotal instrument for wealth preservation and growth, will also operate under new conditions. The era of rapid gains from technology companies and meme stocks is giving way to a more cautious investment landscape. Amidst rising inflation and interest rates, investors are becoming more selective. Companies with solid balance sheets, predictable cash flows, and the capacity to transfer increased cost to consumers are gaining prominence. The once reliable strategy of buying on dips is losing its automatic appeal, requiring more careful analysis. Changes are equally evident in the labor market. A prolonged period of low inflation and economic stability allowed workers to plan their careers years ahead. However, in this new economic environment, agility and adaptability are vital. Transformations driven by automation, artificial intelligence, and deglobalization are reshaping employment structures. Entire job categories are emerging or evolving rapidly, making continuous education and skill development essential, not just for competitiveness, but for financial security. Under these conditions, lifelong learning is no longer optional but a necessity. Every economic downturn creates opportunities as well. Some experts suggest that Russia, with its prior experience navigating economic sanctions and its wealth of natural resources, may find itself in a comparatively advantageous position. Having endured the economic upheavals of the 90s, Russian society's familiarity with high inflation and instability could serve as a competitive edge in the current global landscape. Investing in professional skills becomes especially crucial when stability is scarce, as expertise often proves the most reliable asset. In a high inflation setting, those possessing in-demand competencies tend to thrive, as demand persists for solutions to pressing issues. Moreover, during times of inflation, it makes sense to invest in durable goods that retain value, ensuring resources are preserved even amid economic turbulence. The current consumer model, which relies heavily on planned obsolescence, is increasingly proving unprofitable in economic terms. As a result, investing in high-quality, durable goods is shifting from mere consumption to a form of capital preservation, serving as a tangible asset that retains value over time. Among these investments, acquiring agricultural land near urban areas appears especially promising. Land not only functions as a long-term investment, but also acts as a safeguard against severe economic downturns. The strategic importance of local food production is rising once again, underscoring its vital role in future resilience. History demonstrates that economic crises are cyclical, always giving way to periods of recovery and growth. The ongoing transformations in the global economy present both risks and exceptional opportunities for those who can assess the situation accurately and act decisively. To navigate this new landscape, innovative financial strategies tailored to the evolving reality are essential. Early adaptation will be crucial, providing a meaningful advantage in the emerging economic environment. In daily life, signs of these economic shifts become increasingly visible, whether through changing market behavior, inflation trends, or shifts in employment patterns. Preparing for a secure financial future requires awareness and strategic planning. Reflecting on your own experience, what changes have you observed? How do you intend to safeguard your wealth moving forward? Your insights and approaches are valuable for understanding how others perceive and respond to current economic challenges.